Welcome back to an unexpected part 5 of the SVG Geometry Nodes series. I thought part 4 would be the final part, but since I've done that, I got comments about beveling, and I did another series of tutorials about text in Geometry Nodes, which is similar to SVG content. And we beveled the text, and I would like to take that, what we learned in the text series about beveling, and try to apply it to the SVG logo series. So I would like to try to bevel the logo, which is relatively easy because it's just curves. But a more interesting thing I would like to try is the engraved logo that we engraved into another object and try to bevel the edges that the engraved Boolean operation makes. And that's quite challenging, but I would like to try. So strap in. We're gonna create some monstrosities of node setups. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Let's dive into Blender. So here in Blender, this is where we left off in part 4. And I would like to just take this and clean up a little bit like we do usually when we revisit an older part. So let's hide this. Let's first focus only on the logo. So I'm gonna take this Boolean operation that is very expensive. So if we change anything here, we have to wait like a bunch of seconds for it to update. So I'm gonna just disable that, and I'm gonna hide that object, and we're gonna only look at the logo for now. And the logo has a bunch of geometry nodes modifiers. In order to know what's going on when they're minified, I like to just copy this and paste it in here. Same for this one. And then we can hide them and we see what's going on. And also here you can see this Geometry Nodes setup is protected with this little shield icon. That means that if we don't use it in any object, we can still, and we then reload the blend file, we still make sure this node setup is saved in the blend file. And I want to do the same with the other one like that. And now we can safely just remove these modifiers, and I think I'll just do that and see what we have here. And also I'm just gonna reset the rotation and location, and I would like to just try to make this logo 3D with a bevel, the same way we did with the text. And in order to save time, I'm not going to do the whole thing again. I'm not going to set up the whole node tree from scratch again. I'm just going to go and append some node trees from the text part 3 series. So I'm going to open that blend file and go into node tree, and I'm just going to get everything. And I'm going to make sure fake user is checked, which is that little shield icon. That means that we don't need to use these node trees, but they will still be saved in the blend file, so they will always be available. So I'm going to append those to the blend file. And it also appended some annotations that I probably did in the Geometry Nodes view. So I don't need that anymore, so let's just delete that. And now we can select the text, add a Geometry Nodes modifier, and we can do something like meshify curves. And you can see it turns it into 3D, so that's cool. And with this meshify curves, this is pretty much the final Geometry Nodes setup we made with this whole repeat zone and everything in the part 3 of the text in Geometry Nodes series. So let's try this. Let's bevel this. And it does add a little layer, as you can see, if you have a wireframe turned on, but it doesn't really work. And maybe you remember from the text part in last time that it has to do something with this text resolution, because we're trying to grab inside of here, inside of this fill, curve, and capture normals. We're trying to grab this and sample the index, and that just breaks in certain cases. So to make sure that doesn't break, we can add another geometry nodes modifier. First, I'm going to copy again this name and paste it here so we know what it is. Add another geometry nodes modifier and move it to the top, and then add a new node tree. What I would like to do is modify these curves a little bit. So what I'm going to name this is prepare the curves or something. And that should be fine. So what I want to do first is something with the curve resolution. It's called spline resolution. Actually, no. What I would like to do is resolution, set spline resolution, and plug that in here. Doesn't change anything because 12 is the default and the original curves were also set to 12. But let's move that to 1. And if we go ahead and bevel this, now it's doing something. It's not looking good, but it's at least doing something more than before. So now after this set spline resolution, you can subdivide your curve, and that allows you to add a little bit more detail. So maybe a cuts of 4 works. And this was one way to do it. The alternative way is you can switch this with the alternative, and that was to resample the curve. And that removes your sharp corners, which is a downside. But for this, I think it's better to do that because that makes the whole thing a little bit more robust. So we can do this. We plug this into the true of the switch and set it to length. And then maybe a length of 0.01 to start with. And we can expose this switch onto the outside, and we can name that to resample. So we can either use the resample strategy or the subdivide curve strategy. And now we can toggle this. And as you can see, beveling is working. But if you look at this other letter, it is working in the opposite way, which is not good. And the reason for that is, this is something I wanted to cover. This SVG file is probably not that clean, so it has to do with the curve direction. So if the curve direction is flipped or mirrored, then the curve normals are also flipped. So it's kind of a flipped normals case. And fortunately, there's a really easy fix for this. So you have to go into edit mode, and you can select a curve that has the wrong direction. So for example, this one, and you can select the whole curve by hitting L while hovering in close proximity to the curve. And you can take that, go into segments and switch direction. And look at that, that fixes it. That flips the direction of the curve, and it flips the normals as well. So that fixes it. So I'm just going to do this for all the parts that don't that are flipped. And with all of that selected, you can switch the direction, and that should fix the whole thing. That is one. The other thing I would like to fix is, of course, these tiny letters. The bevel is way too large for those, but for the bigger letters, it's fine. So what I would like to do is go back into edit mode, go to the top view and use a box selection. Maybe this is actually easier to do in the layout view because we have a little bit more space. So I'm gonna turn off this blue face orientation effect and go to top view, and I want to select this tagline with a box selection. Easy enough. And then hit P to separate this. And as you can see, it creates a new object, and we're still in edit mode with the original. So that's the main logo. We can hit tab to tab out of edit mode. And now we have 2 separate objects, and they still have the same modifier stack. So this one we can rename to tagline. And now they still have the same modifiers, but we have exposed a bunch of settings, which is very useful because now we can come in, and for the tagline, we can just lower all of this and make it look a little bit more clean for this tagline. And we can add some steps to it as well as here. And that looks pretty good now. So yeah, that's step one. We can now use the tools we built in the text series and use it for a random SVG logo, and it works quite well. You might have to clean up the curves, but this is pretty nice. So this is already something cool, but pretty simple because yeah, this is pretty much what we did with the text as well. So from now on, I'm gonna just hide this tagline and I wanna focus on the logo. And I wanna try to engrave it into our cylinder and bevel that as well. And that's gonna be pretty complicated. So let's try it. I don't need to do this meshify curves, but I still wanna keep it around. So I'm just gonna disable it and leave it here. The prepare curves is fine. I wanna keep that. And now let's place this, rotate it around the X and move this to global so we can move it around in the global directions. And let's just move it somewhere where we want to project it onto this cylinder. And this cylinder takes an object, the engrave mesh, and it has to be a mesh. Currently, this is curves. So we have to turn it into a mesh, then bend it, if you remember part 4. And then we can move on to the cylinder and go from there. So let's add the modifier that turns this into a mesh. So that's curve to mesh. We also have this meshify curves, but that kind of turns it into 3D. First, we just need a flat mesh because that's something we can bend and then we can extrude it. So let's do that first. That looks like this. And I want to go back to geometry nodes and kind of modify this a little bit. So currently we do some stuff with the resolution and the splines, and that's actually something we already do in the prepare curve. So let's copy that and paste it here so we can see that. And so what we want to do here actually is, let's rename this to curve to flat mesh. So it's clear that this stays flat and not 3D. Then we can also copy and paste that in here. And I just want to remove this one as well. And instead of filling the curve, maybe you remember this from the last part of the text series, for we had to do something special. We had to capture the normals of the curve before turning the curve into a mesh, because that's pretty much what's happening here. We're starting with curves, we're ending with a mesh, and we need those curve normals in order to do our bevel. So I would like to, let's see, I think I'm just going to remove this whole node and add the group that we got from the text blend file. So that would be the fill curve and capture normals, this one. And that looks like this. And that is fine. We still have this resolution here. We don't need that anymore. So let's remove that and clean that up. Now we have a curve and we capture the normals, but if we go into cylinder, we don't have those normals anymore because we're importing this object externally using this orange object property. So that's not going to work. So instead, we want to write this curve normal to the mesh. And you can do that by writing an attribute. So store named attribute. And we have to run the geometry through this. We have to say this is going to be a vector. And we can plug this in. And we have to give it a name. And I'm just going to call it the same curve normal. But I'm going to keep it lowercase and using underscores instead of spaces. I think that's the convention, and that is, if you know programming, that is very common, especially in Python. So I'm going to call this curve normal like that. You could call it plural. I don't know what the convention is, but yeah, I'm just going to call it this, the same name as here. And now we can leave this, and when we go back into cylinder, we can access this. But it's not that simple, because after doing this, we have to bend this flat mesh, because currently this is not looking good and there's some issues here that this is looking really weird. Let's try to fix this first. Let's see, maybe this subdivide is messing things up. Yeah, it does. So let's just remove this. Okay, so now, as you can see, this part of the logo is a little bit squished in the horizontal direction. The part in the middle looks fine, and then this part looks squished as well, because this is supposed to be a circle, and here it's kind of an oval. And the reason for that is that we are kind of projecting the logo into the direction of this control object, this empty. And in order to do this well, we have to bend this into a circle. And we did that in part 4 of the SVG series, and we still have that node tree. So let's, after our curve to flat mesh, while capturing and storing this named attribute, we want to bend the logo again. So bend cylinder. We have 2 flavors. One is bend around a cylinder based on a radius, which is just a value. And the other one is bend around a cylinder based on a control object, which is this bend center. So I want to choose that one and choose the bend center as the control object. And now we can copy this and paste it in here. And that fixes that issue of the squished projection. And now the logo looks good sitting on the cylinder. Let's see if we can actually use this named attribute. So let's just test this in the next modifier. I'm gonna clean this up a little bit with my node align tool that I shared in, I think, the last text tutorial. Okay, so here we're working with the geometry. It's only 3 nodes that actually work with geometry. I want to set the position again, and I just want to test by reading my named attribute. And then we have to choose our curve normal. And it already knows it's a vector. And then I want to scale this down because the normals are quite large for the scale of this logo. So I'm gonna scale it down by 100 and plug that into the offset and see if that works as expected. So I expect this logo to become a bit skinnier so that we can do beveling. So let's see if that works. It looks like it works, but if we look at it from the top, I don't know if you can see this properly. From top view, you can see that it kind of rotates. And the direction these points are moving with setting the position, the offset direction is the X direction. But what I want to do is move it in this direction because that's the bend logo. And the reason for this is that we are bending this just by setting the position of the points. We're not actually bending anything. We're just calculating some math and then setting the position of every individual point. But the curve normals are not bending with it. The curve normals still point in the original direction. So let's fix this. And this is going to be slightly complicated. So for this, I want to just hide the cylinder. And also I want to just get rid of any transformations. So actually the transformation is fine, but let's reset the rotation to 0. And now we can see from the front view what this set position is doing. And it's kind of moving things in the wrong direction. So what we want to do is we want to bend our normals. And to do that, all you need to do is rotate the normals. And let's get a little bit more space by removing the timeline there. You want to rotate the curve. So you can rotate, you want to rotate the vector because the normals are vectors. So rotate vector, that's one way to do it. And then you also have vector rotate, which is kind of confusing, but let's look at it as well. vector rotate. And we can make it work with both, but the vector rotate is slightly simpler because all we want to do is rotate around the y-axis. And that's why I reset the rotation to not get confused. All we want to rotate around is the y-axis. So we can say that in here, we want to rotate around the y-axis, and the center is just 0 for every normal. We just want to rotate around the origin of the normal. So this can be left at 0, and then all we need to plug in is an angle. And so we can remove this. You can also create Euler to rotation, and then you can plug in an angle into the y, but that's just more complicated and it's doing the same thing. So we want to rotate our vector with a vector rotate. We have to plug in an angle. What is the angle? And this is where my knowledge kind of starts to break down, but what we're doing here is kind of getting the difference between the control point and the positions in order to make the control really nice, to have really nice control. So that's what makes this a bit more complicated. But then what we get here is an angle, because that's what we're plugging into the sine and cosine. And that's all, you always plug in an angle in those things. So this is our angle. So I'm gonna just get that and plug that in here, and maybe we can do this to make it clear that this is an angle. And you can give this a name, in case you didn't know that, with F2 and call it angle. And that is quite useful to have this. So that's what we're plugging in here. And now we have rotated our normals. So instead of plugging in the originals, we want to plug in the rotated normals, curve normals. And when we do this, things look better, but it's still not perfect. And like I said, this is where my knowledge kind of breaks down. It's kind of moving in this direction, but it should move in this direction. So what I found as a solution to this, and this is not pretty, but just adding a multiply and multiplying it with something between 0 and 1. So half is quite good. I think we need slightly more. So here you can see you can kind of rotate this. So I found like 0.6 seems to be the right value, or actually 0.7-ish. And this is really like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm just doing this like mathematically. I'm not sure why we need to do this. So if you know this, please leave a comment. But I just found that by trial and error, this is what kind of fixes it. So now we can make our logo skinnier using the curve normals that are bent. And yeah, that fixes it. So this set position is just to test the normal. So what we need to do now is store the named attribute again. And that's going to be the same named attribute as here. So we could expose this into a string and then maybe copy this, paste it in here. So we have curve normal, plug that in here and then in here as well. So we have to only specify it once. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit cleaner. And then the scale should actually not be in there. And well, actually, let's get that back. We can remove that from there. And then the scale is just to preview what we're doing. And yeah, I'm actually not sure if this is the right value. This is actually interesting. Now it seems like a negative 0.7 works even better if we use larger values for the scale. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this actually... Maybe -1, that would make sense. That is like the opposite. -0.8 seems to be the right value. Because we probably need a negative value because we're counteracting this value. I'm not sure, but this looks like the best way to make this work. And this value is way too big, but this is just for testing. These two nodes are just to kind of debug our curve normal and see if we're in the right direction. So now we're taking that and we're storing it back into the same curve normal. And now we have to plug the geometry through this as well. So it's actually stored in the geometry, and we can remove these two. And that is how to fix that bending and how to keep our curve normals pointing in the right direction. All right, now we can move to the cylinder object, and let's rotate our curve again around the x-axis 90 degrees. That gives us this nice black projection. We can hide this for a bit, and let's try it again. Let's try to make the logo skinnier again, just to see if we can use our curve normals, which we need for beveling. So in this node setup, what's happening? Let's see. Oh, let's look at our main node tree for the cylinder. So let's organize this a little bit. Here, what I'm doing is either I'm setting the material to get this join geometry preview, which is really cheap. So if you need to change anything, you can preview things like this. But then when we really want to do the engraving, we use this Boolean, which takes a couple seconds to calculate. So all of this stuff is like the output, engrave and preview. And we can put this in a frame using Control J or Command J. And we can give this a name like final engrave / preview. And it's getting in 2 geometries. Let's turn that into 1 by adding this redirect like this. And now we can just grab this whole thing and move it to the right. So we get some space. And then over here, we are pretty much taking our objects and our center object to know where to point our raycast. And we're pretty much projecting. Yeah, all of this stuff is projecting. So I can hit Control P again. No, Control J to join. And all we're doing here is project object to cylinder. Maybe we can add that as well. Okay, and then what we're doing here is solidifying the mesh. I kind of want to get rid of this because we're going to do this in a totally different way now. So let's get rid of that. And that seems to remove our entire object, but that's because it's inside of the cylinder. We can move it outside with this. There we go. Now we just have this flat mesh sitting close to our cylinder. And let's test it again. Let's test if we can shrink or make it thinner using the curve normals. So we have to read the attribute, read the named attribute, which is our curve normal, and use a set position, which is, we can just duplicate from here. Oh, and now we are expanding this. That's something I don't want, so I can hit Alt P, and now it's out. Set position, we want to scale this down again to 0.01 or something and see if that works. And it doesn't work because we're looking at the viewer node. We just plugged in here. We can plug it in over there instead. And we can see it gets a little bit thinner, but only horizontally. Vertically, it's not changing. Like the thickness of this part here, of this E, is not getting any thinner. And why is that? We have rotated our object, but for some reason the curve normals are not rotating with it. So this object has a rotation that you can see. This logo has a rotation that you can see here, but the curved normals are not taking that, are not rotating with it for some reason. I guess that's to be expected. Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's an easy fix, and we can use that other vector rotate variation. So these two are just for previewing. I want to rotate this vector. Yeah, and here we need a rotation, and that is actually nice because we actually have the exact rotation we need from here. This is our engrave mesh, which has a rotation. So let's grab that and plug it in here. And now instead of plugging in the original curve normals, we rotate them. And that messes up the text, but I think, yeah, it's working. Now it's making everything skinnier, and it just messes up some of the faces because they are n-gons. But that's not a problem. Everything gets skinnier as expected. So now we have a usable curve normals that we can use for our bevel. Finally, so now let's make this monstrosity of a node setup by adding in a bunch of those repeat zones that we used for beveling in the last part of our text series. Okay, this was previewing. So I'm gonna remove this, I'm gonna remove this, I'm gonna remove this. So we can go back to the logo. It doesn't have to be visible. We can still access our modifiers, and we can look at the last, we can look at the Meshify curves. Let's move that down. And this is the bevel setup that I want to be using. And I want to just copy and paste it and plug it in to the cylinder node tree. But before I do that, I want to make sure these connections stay kind of usable. So I'm going to drag through this with shift right click, and that gives me these redirect nodes, and we can give them names. So let's get this one and call it bevel, and this one is bevel steps. And I can just copy these with the whole thing. So that's very useful. And I can just move these here. Yeah. And another one, we have to plug in top. Don't forget that. We have to plug in the geometry. That's easy. We got it here. And then the other one that's going in is this curve normal. So let's add the same kind of point here and just rename it to curve normal. Oh, and this divide node is not really doing anything. So let's remove that, and that cleans it up a little bit. Yeah, that's looking good. And the output is pretty simple. It's just geometry going out. Okay, now we have something to copy and reuse. So let's drag the selection like this, copy it, go back to the cylinder, and paste it in here. So let's see if that works. So we need our curve normals here. We need our geometry. We need a top selection. Currently, we're just working with a flat mesh. So I want to select everything we have. So just select the checkbox. And then we have bevel and bevel steps. I want to have this in the output or in the settings here. So let's do that. Copy the group input node. We can also add a new one, doesn't really matter, or duplicate it and escape it from this thing, from this area or frame. And then we can add some new things in this group. So use Boolean. Okay, I want to add an input called bevel. Also, no, I want to have depth. So I want to be able to control how deep we're beveling. So that's how deep we're engraving. This the depth of the engraving. Then I want bevel amount and bevel steps. And this is a integer. Where is that? Oh, there. Then the default is 0, min is 0, max 64. That's plenty of steps. Depth is a distance. The min is 0. The default is 0.1. Bevel is a distance. Default 0. Min 0. Max doesn't matter. Okay, cool. So now we can get these, plug them in. The depth we don't do anything with yet. Then we have bevel. And maybe use Boolean, move that down, because that's the last thing we want to be messing with. All right, so bevel steps goes here, and that looks good. I want to move the geometry to the top. I think that makes a little bit more sense. So in this node, you can select geometry and move it to the top. Because now if we hit Control-Shift-Click on this, it will connect the geometry instantly to a viewer, which is useful. Okay, and for now, I want to enable the face orientation to see what's the front and what's the back. So the front is blue, the back is red, which is good to know because things are going to get complicated. So this is what we get with bevel steps 0, bevel 0. So let's add 0.01 for bevel and set the steps to 1 to see if we get anything. And yes, we get some bevel and that works. And it's all bending and still everything is working. So that's already looking quite good and robust, except actually while I'm saying that this G is messed up. Maybe we have to increase this. And yes, that fixes it. Yeah, so that works. Cool. But the bevel we want to do, so I might need to draw this again. So let's draw something. So we have a surface and then we have a bevel object that kind of, we have an engrave object that engraves something out of our surface. Then we continue. So what we want to bevel is this part, but also this part. We want to create, instead of this sharp edge and this sharp edge, we want to create something that looks like this from the side view, the side profile. So first, our original logo looks something like this. So first we need to make it bigger, and then it goes down. And then we need to extrude it a bit. And then we need to do the kind of original bevel that we did before. But first we need to move the bevel, instead of beveling like this, we need to move it like this. So we need to flip it. So I hope that makes sense. So let's go back to 3D land. And so now it's beveling and making it smaller. Yeah. So it's making the text thinner. What I want to do is move it out. So the opposite in the bevel X direction. So if we just flip this, I think that should work. Oh wait, no. These. If we flip these two, I think that does the trick. Yeah, now we're beveling in. And if this might be more clear if we have more steps. So let's add some more steps here. And now we can see this kind of nice shape. Maybe we have to increase the amount. And this is kind of what we want to start with. And if we cut this out of the cylinder, we kind of start with a nice rounded edge. So that's already looking quite okay. So yeah, cool. And then we have to extrude and do another bevel. So the easiest way to do that is not to continue here, but to get back to the original. And yeah, the original is kind of this part. And anything that we're beveling, we're moving out. So let's take this original and extrude it. Just a simple extrude. So we can copy that from there. And let's do an extrude. And how much do we want to extrude? That is the depth that we got over here. So maybe we can just duplicate this as well. And we want to extrude this much. And then we want to take this and merge it with our original mesh or join it. So let's get a join geometry node. And currently this is all plugging into our viewer, which is this node. And yeah, that's fine for now. Actually, we can do something. I believe it's this. Yeah, I can make this a bit bigger. So let's focus on the nodes for now. I want to plug this into the join geometry node. And then, yeah, we have to view it again. So we have to move out of this. Okay, let's see what's happening. If we currently the depth is 0, so let's see what's happening. And now we're moving in the wrong direction. And that's because this face orientation is really useful. The face is flipped to this being the outside and this is the inside. So if we are extruding in a positive direction, we're moving this way. So we can either extrude in a negative direction, but then we're working with flipped faces. So let's instead first flip the face and then extrude in a positive direction. So now we're taking this, we're flipping it, and then we're moving that way. So this red face, let's make that blue by flipping it over here. So we can do flip faces, plug that in right there. And now that flips this face. And if you extrude now by increasing the depth, we're moving this way. So this is kind of what we want to cut out of our cylinder, right? So this is like, and we can add more steps or whatever. And yeah, that is looking good. So yeah, now we have this depth. Let's set it at 0.1. And now we want to apply another bevel. So we can copy this whole thing again. So let's organize this slightly. This is our normal. This is just flipping the face and then extruding it a little bit. And after that, we want to bevel again. So let's copy this whole thing. Let's see. This whole setup and copy it under there. And now instead of directly moving this geometry in there, I want to plug this one in here and remove this one and plug this one in here. And now we're going to plug this stuff in so that we can do another bevel. So there, the amount of bevel, we can get that from here. Plug that in, bevel steps. And instead of everything, I want to only get the top that we got from this extrude mesh and plug that into the top. And now we're kind of mirroring the effect because we modified this setup to make it bevel to the outside, and that's what we copied. So we have to undo that by taking this X and swapping these around. So I'm going to plug this into the top and this one into the bottom. And that's pretty much the same as multiplying by -1, but that fixes our bevel, as you can see. And this is kind of the shape that I want to cut out of the cylinder in order to make those edges less sharp and beveled, pretty much. So the bevel amount currently is quite high, so I want to just lower that a little bit. Maybe to 0.01. And yeah, that looks pretty clean. Let's see if there are any issues. And yes, there are. And that happens on the outside bevel. So that is this one. And maybe we have to increase our merge by distance to fix that to, I don't know, 0.004 maybe. Not quite. Increase the steps maybe. That doesn't help. Maybe we have to reduce this. Maybe we have to change this density. Maybe reduce it or increase it. So we're preparing the curves over here. And let's see if we set this to 0.02 instead, if that fixes something. That seems to work. Maybe it also has to do something with the fact that we're working with n-gons. I found that triangulating this and then beveling gives less clean bevels than doing it like this. So what we can do is triangulate after we do the beveling. So that might be a nice thing to add. So triangulate. All right, that might make things more robust. And we can do the same for the other side, but let's try to see if the Boolean now works. And what we have to cut out is not this, what's still pointing to our final part, but whatever we get out of this join geometry. And maybe we also have to merge by distance after this, because we're simply joining and laying these two meshes on top of each other without really joining them or merging them together. So let's instead do that and look at that, and maybe 0.002. And that's what we want to plug in over here. Now let's turn off this viewer node and turn off the face orientation because the faces are properly oriented. And as we can see, we're still sticking out a little bit. So instead of applying the boolean now, I want to fix that. And that is being controlled by this little scale node over here. And as you can see, you can move this in and out. So if you just move this to 0, maybe that makes it work. That kind of makes sure that we are not getting any bevel here. So maybe we have to set this to the amount of bevel that we're doing. So let's copy this node and just add it over here. Set it to the amount of bevel, but now it's moving in the wrong direction. So let's add it, maybe multiply it by -1. And we can multiply by -1, but then maybe it moves it too far into the cylinder. So maybe multiply by -0.9 or something. And let's try that. I have no idea if this is gonna work, but let's try to use the boolean and see what happens. And there we can see we kind of get something that looks good. We're getting some kind of bevel, and also we're getting the bevel over here. We're getting both our sharp edges now being beveled and rounded, but we have some issues because we are too deep into the cylinder. One way we can fix this is by just moving out further after this widened bevel on the top here. So we are triangulating this. I don't know if we need to do that before, but we can just add another extrude here. Or we can move, let's see what's better. Maybe we can just set the position, and I forgot to turn off the boolean, so things are really slow. Now any edit you do takes 5 seconds. So let's turn this off for a second. And you can see that here the original cylinder is shining through, which causes those issues. So we can set the position and move them out a little bit. Maybe that works. I'm just trying to think if this is the best way. Yeah, I think let's try this. And the direction we want to move into is our normal, which I think we can grab from here. I'm not sure. Let's just get the normal. All right, let's start with a normal and scale that to something small, 0.1 maybe, 0.01, and offset that. And that doesn't work too well. Okay, that's because it's okay. I guess an extra extrude node in this case is better. So let's do that instead, and probably simpler as well. So I want to connect this up again and just extrude this, because that extrudes more in the direction of the faces rather than the normals of the vertices. And let's do 0.01, and that fixes the issue. It will also make the bevel of this edge less nice, less rounded. So there's a bit of a trade-off there, but I think it's not too bad. And I don't know if we need this triangulate. Yeah, I guess it's better to have it. We can try and add this triangulate before we're doing all of this beveling to see if that makes things more robust. And maybe, yes, it does. Maybe it does. So maybe we can disable it here. And this is just a lot of trial and error, as you can see. But yeah, let's extrude this and look at it from the inside. Okay, this is kind of... Okay, we're extruding individual. Let's turn that off. And if we don't do this... Okay, this really messes up. Interesting. Maybe I have to turn back on face orientation, because this really screws things up. Oh wait, I only want to get the top and extrude that. That was my mistake. Okay, this is a lot better. So just add some extra space to the outside, and we could try and move this out as well to make it less sharp. But let's try this first. I'm gonna set it to 0.01 to keep it small. And now we get something like this. And yeah, that looks pretty clean. Let's try to cut that out of, just gonna remove this viewer node. Let's try to cut this out of the mesh and see what happens. And that is looking pretty good. I'm quite happy with this, to be honest. It's a bit of a trial and error thing. And that's because there's just so many nodes that every step in between, you can tweak little things. And if you have a great intuition on how to work with nodes, and especially geometry nodes, then this is a lot of fun and it's very powerful. If not, then it can be very frustrating, but I think this is a pretty good result. And as you can see, there are n-gons here. Maybe you don't like that. Then you can turn on the triangulate. Oh, we didn't add a triangulate. You can add a triangulate in this section, which will triangulate these faces. We're kind of rounding things off. And now we can look in the inside. This triangulate is doing this. And you can see, okay, this is what I wanted to show as well. You can see these nice quads are now also being triangulated. How can you prevent that? You can either only triangulate the top like that, or if you don't have a selection like that, you can select it by the minimum vertices, which if you set it to 4, then it will take a face with 4 vertices and triangulate it. If you set it to 5, then it has to be a minimum of 5 vertices, which is an n-gon. And it will only triangulate the n-gons. So that is a way to do it. But I think, yeah, we can use the selection. It doesn't really matter. And now if you turn Boolean back on, we will get those triangle faces instead, which might be more robust for things like 3D printing. But yeah, that's pretty much how it works. I'm pretty happy with this result. We're beveling this sharp edge with an arbitrary amount of bevel steps and an arbitrary bevel amount, and also this inside. And it's a nice rounded bevel, and it's based on an SVG logo projected onto a cylinder, and it's really complicated. But we did it. And this is our node setup. All right, I hope that was useful. I hope you learned something. I will share this entire blend file with all the nodes in a written article that I will do about this. I already have a written article about the SVG's logo, so I probably just modify that and link it in the description. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.